The air in the Tanaka dojo was thick with the scent of discipline, a potent blend of aged wood, sweat, and the sharp, clean smell of freshly laundered cotton GIs. It was a cathedral of controlled violence, a place where the chaos of the outside world was tamed by the rigid geometry of kata and the thunderous finality of a perfectly executed strike. Presiding over this sanctuary was Sensei Kenjiro Tanaka, a man forged in the crucible of traditional Shotokan karate. He was a 5th Dan black belt, and his presence filled the room as surely as the afternoon sun slanting through the high windows. His posture was a testament to a lifetime of training. His voice, when he barked a command, was a percussive force that straightened spines and quickened hearts. His dojo was his kingdom, and his students, an assembly of eager, muscular young men, were his loyal subjects, their reverence for him bordering on worship. It was into this charged atmosphere of established hierarchy and masculine pride that she walked. Her entrance was so quiet, so devoid of presence, it was like a gap in the noise rather than a sound of its own. Her name was Elara Vance. She was slight of build, her frame almost lost inside the stark white of her new, unadorned GI. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, severe knot, and her face, pale and unlined, held an expression of neutral calm that the room's occupants immediately misinterpreted as timidity. She moved to the edge of the tatami mat, bowed with practiced respect, and found a space at the very back, her movements economical and self-contained. Whispers, sharp and venomous as hornets, immediately began to buzz among the senior belts. "Look at that!" a brawny brown belt named Marcus hissed to his friend, a smirk twisting his lips. "Did she wander in from a ballet class?" His companion snickered. "Sensei's gonna fold her like laundry." Even Kenjiro, observing from his position at the front, felt a familiar pang of weary annoyance. He believed karate was for everyone, but he had seen her type before. The curious, the thrill-seekers, the ones who had watched too many movies and thought martial arts was a dance. They rarely lasted more than a week, their fragile romanticism shattered by the first bruise or the first grueling session of Kihan. He saw her small wrists, her slender neck, the way she seemed to absorb the room's energy rather than project any of her own. He mentally placed her on a short timer. She would be a distraction, a fleeting novelty. His gaze swept over her and dismissed her in the same instant, his focus returning to the promising young men who were the true future of his dojo, the ones who reflected his own power and his legacy. For a long moment, Elara stood in her chosen spot, a ghost in a room of warriors. She felt the weight of their judgment, a palpable pressure on her shoulders. It was a familiar weight, one she had carried in countless rooms just like this one across the world. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, her mind a placid lake. Let them look. Let them judge. The mat would tell the truth. It always did. The command to line up, "Siretsu!" cracked through the air like a whip. The students scrambled into neat, ordered rows, their movements sharp, a testament to endless repetition. Elara found her place at the end of the line, her posture perfect, her alignment with the others precise to the millimeter. Kenjiro began the class with his usual ritual, a sequence of deep breathing exercises followed by a litany of the dojo's guiding principles: respect, humility, perseverance. Elara listened, her expression unreadable, her mind absorbing the cadence of his voice. She found no fault in the words themselves, only in the chasm between their utterance and their application. The warm-up was punishing, designed to weed out the weak and forge the dedicated. Hundreds of punches, blocks, and kicks were executed in unison, the room a symphony of snapping GIs and guttural ki shouts. Kenjiro's sharp eyes roamed the ranks, correcting posture, barking criticisms. "Marcus, more hip rotation. Your power comes from the ground, not your shoulder. Kaido, your guard is dropping. You invite the strike." When his gaze fell upon Elara, it was with an air of detached inevitability. He watched her execute a rising block, an age-uke. Her form was odd. It wasn't the wide, powerful arc he taught. It was a tight, minimalist motion, her elbow staying close to her body, her fist barely rising above her forehead. It was technically incorrect by his standards, yet he couldn't deny its efficiency. There was no wasted energy. He filed it away as the awkwardness of a beginner and moved on. As the drills intensified, a bead of sweat traced a path down Marcus's temple. He glanced back at Alara. She was barely perspiring. Her breathing was even, a slow, rhythmic cadence that seemed almost meditative. While others were starting to pant, their movements growing ragged, hers remained precise, economical, and maddeningly calm. The initial mockery among the students had begun to curdle into a strange, resentful curiosity. This wasn't the usual pattern. The frail-looking newcomer was supposed to be gasping for air by now, her face flushed with exertion, her spirit visibly cracking. But she was a still point in their swirling storm of effort. Kenjiro's voice cut through the air again. "A moment of focus for our newer members," he announced, his tone laden with condescension, though he did not look directly at her. "Karate is not about simply going through the motions. It is about imbuing every technique with spirit, with zanshin. A lack of commitment in the dojo leads to a lack of readiness in a confrontation. Some of you look like you are merely waiting for the clock to run out. That is not the way." The barb was aimed at Alara, and everyone knew it. It was his way of publicly shaming her perceived lack of effort, of reasserting the dojo's demanding culture. Marcus smirked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. He felt validated. The sensei saw it too. She wasn't one of them. Alara heard the words. She felt the collective gaze of the class shift to her. Inside her, there was no flicker of anger, no sting of shame. There was only a quiet, deep-seated patience, a resolve that had been tempered in fires Kenjiro Tanaka could not possibly imagine. She met his gaze across the room for a brief second, a silent acknowledgement of his challenge. Then she returned her focus to the front, her body a study in poised stillness, waiting for the next instruction. The true lesson had not yet begun. The next phase of the class was Ippon Kumite, one-step sparring. It was a foundational drill designed to teach timing, distance, and the application of basic techniques in a controlled environment. The attacker would announce their target, Joden for head, Chuden for body, and launch a single, committed attack. The defender's job was to block and counter in one fluid motion. Kenjiro paired the students, deliberately placing Alara with a junior student, a young orange belt named Ren, who was eager but clumsy. Ren bowed, a nervous energy buzzing around him. "Joden OSU!" he announced, stepping forward with a lunging punch aimed at her head. His technique was telegraphed, his body rigid with anticipation. Alara didn't respond with the standard rising block they had just practiced. Instead, she took a tiny, almost imperceptible shuffle step backward and to the side, a movement so subtle it was more a shift in gravity than a step. Ren's fist sliced through the air where her face had been a millisecond before. As his arm extended, she met his wrist with the delicate precision of a surgeon, her open palm not striking, but adhering to it. Using his own forward momentum against him, she guided his arm past her, and with a slight rotation of her hips, she was suddenly at his side, her other hand resting gently on his exposed ribs. She didn't strike. She didn't need to. Ren stumbled, his balance completely broken, and found himself staring at the wall, his attack having ended in empty space. He blinked, a profound look of confusion on his face. He hadn't felt a block. He hadn't felt a push. He had simply missed, and then found himself hopelessly out of position. He bowed again, his cheeks flushing. "My apologies, I lost my balance." He thought it was his own error. Alara simply bowed back, her face serene. They repeated the drill. Ren attacked with a front kick to the body. This time, Alara's lead hand came down in a soft, sweeping motion, deflecting the kick's trajectory just enough to send it wide. Simultaneously, she stepped in, occupying the space he had just vacated, her presence once again disrupting his entire structure. He landed awkwardly, stumbling again. Across the dojo, a few other students began to notice. The usual slap of a hard block and the satisfying thud of a counter-strike were absent from Alara's station. There was only the sound of a shuffling footstep, a swish of cotton, and her opponent suddenly looking bewildered. It was bizarre. It was quiet. Kenjiro watched from the front, his arms crossed over his powerful chest. He saw what the others saw, but his experienced eye interpreted it differently. He saw a beginner's luck, a fortunate awkwardness that was coincidentally effective against another beginner. Her movements lacked the crisp, decisive finality of true karate. They were soft, evasive, almost passive. He saw her guide Ren's punch instead of blocking it. A critical error. In a real fight, that softness would get her hurt. He made a mental note to correct her fundamentals later, assuming she even returned for the next class. He was missing the forest for the trees, focusing on the absence of his familiar techniques while ignoring the undeniable result. Her opponent was consistently and effortlessly neutralized without a single blow being landed. Kenjiro's patience finally snapped. The quiet efficiency at the back of the room was becoming a subtle disruption, a silent challenge to his authority. He could see the growing confusion on his students' faces. They were looking at Alara, then at him, their expressions asking a question he found intolerable. Why was this newcomer making his senior belts look so incompetent? He clapped his hands, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Marcus! Switch partners! Spar with Vance! A predatory grin spread across Marcus's face. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was permission. He swaggered over to Alara, cracking his knuckles. He was a head taller, and outweighed her by at least 80 pounds of solid muscle. Ready for a real lesson, little bird? He sneered, settling into a low, aggressive stance. Alara simply squared her shoulders, her own stance deceptively casual. Whenever you are, she replied, her voice calm and even. Marcus exploded forward, not with a single telegraphed punch, but with a flurry of aggressive, bullying techniques. He was trying to overwhelm her, to drive her back with sheer physical force. He threw a heavy right cross. Alara didn't retreat. She swayed back just enough for the punch to skim past her nose, the rush of air tickling her skin. As his arm overextended, she stepped into the void he had created, her hand gently cupping his elbow. It wasn't a strike, it was a check. A subtle, irritating pressure that disrupted the mechanics of his shoulder. He tried to follow with a left hook, but his arm felt sluggish, disconnected. He stumbled, catching himself. Frustration flashed in his eyes. He launched a powerful roundhouse kick, aiming for her ribs. It was a kick that had won him tournament matches. He put all of his weight and power into it. Instead of a hard block, which would have surely broken her arm, Alara did something that defied the dojo's logic. She moved into the kick. In the split second before impact, she rotated her body and took a short, angular step forward, entering the perilous space inside the kick's arc. The most powerful part of the kick, his instep, sailed harmlessly behind her. The inside of his thigh brushed against her side as she flowed past it. Now she was inside his guard, too close for him to kick or punch effectively. Before he could react, she placed her hand flat on his sternum and pushed. It wasn't a strike. It was a perfectly timed, biomechanically precise shove that exploited his compromised balance. Marcus, a man of immense strength, found himself stumbling backward like a clumsy child, his feet tangling as he fought for equilibrium. A wave of murmurs rippled through the dojo. This was no longer luck. This was not beginner's awkwardness. The mockery had died completely, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. Marcus's face was a mask of crimson fury and humiliation. He had been publicly outmaneuvered without being struck. He had been made to look like a fool by a woman half his size, and he hadn't landed a single clean blow. He glared at her, breathing heavily, his arrogance shattered into 1,000 pieces of raw ego. Alara simply stood there, waiting, her breathing as steady as it was at the beginning of class. Her placid expression was the ultimate insult, a mirror reflecting his own incompetence back at him. The sight of his star-brown belt being played with like a child's toy was the final straw. Kenjiro's pride, a fierce and towering thing he had spent a lifetime building, could no longer tolerate the spectacle. The quiet woman at the back was not just a distraction, She was an anomaly that threatened the very fabric of his authority, and the proven efficacy of his style. The foundations of his world were being subtly undermined with every effortless evasion she performed. He had to restore order. He had to prove that his way, the traditional, powerful, and time-honored way of Shotokan, was superior to whatever strange, passive movements she was employing. His voice boomed across the silent dojo. "Yame! Stop!" Every student froze. Kenjiro strode to the center of the mat, his GI seeming to crackle with contained energy. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes narrowed to slits. He gestured dismissively at Marcus, who shuffled away, his head bowed in shame. Then, Kenjiro's gaze locked onto Alara. "Vance," he commanded, the name sharp and cold. "Front and center." Alara walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate. She stood before him in the vast, empty space in the middle of the tatame, the entire class now a silent, watching audience. The air was thick with a tension so profound it was almost visible. They all knew what this was. A public execution. A master demonstrating his dominance over a student who had gotten too clever. "You have a peculiar way of moving," Kenjiro said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A lot of dodging. Very little substance. In a real confrontation, that passivity will fail you. Karate is about meeting force, breaking it, and overwhelming it. It is about spirit and commitment." He settled into his own deep, formidable fighting stance, a living statue of lethal potential. "I believe a practical demonstration is in order. To clarify the difference between evasion and true martial prowess." He was issuing a direct challenge. It was a gross violation of dojo etiquette for a master to so nakedly call out a student, especially a new one, but his pride had blinded him to protocol. He was no longer a teacher. He was a king defending his throne from a mysterious usurper. Alara met his fiery gaze with her own calm, unwavering one. For the first time, a flicker of something new entered her eyes, not fear, but a quiet resolve. She had tried to remain unseen, to simply exist and train. But she had been singled out, challenged, and her own code of honor, one forged in circumstances far more dire than a karate class, would not allow her to refuse. She gave a short, formal bow. "As you wish, sensei." She didn't sink into a low stance like his. Instead, she simply brought her hands up slightly, her body remaining relatively upright, her weight perfectly centered. It was a stance of readiness, not aggression. To Kenjiro, it looked amateurish, open, and inviting. He smirked. This would be over quickly. The spar began not with a bang, but with a palpable shift in the dojo's atmosphere. The world seemed to shrink to the square of tatame occupied by the master and the mystery. Kenjiro initiated the exchange, wanting to end it decisively. He unleashed an Izuki, a lunging punch that was his signature technique, a piston of force launched from a perfectly coiled hip, capable of breaking ribs. It rocketed toward Alara's solar plexus with blinding speed. To the onlookers, it seemed impossible to stop. But Alara didn't try to stop it. As the fist closed the final inches, she performed a movement of breathtaking subtlety. She didn't block. She parried. Her left hand, open-palmed, met his punching wrist not with impact, but with a gentle, flowing redirection, like a stream diverting a rolling stone. Simultaneously, her body rotated on its axis, and his fist, carrying the full force of his body weight, slid harmlessly past her. For a dizzying moment, Kenjiro was overextended, his side completely exposed. He felt a phantom touch as her hand hovered a mere inch from his kidney before she withdrew. The move was so fast, so fluid, that most students barely registered what had happened. All they saw was their sensei's most powerful punch miss its mark completely. Kenjiro recovered instantly, his shock masked by a scowl. A fluke. He refused to believe otherwise. He followed up with a mawashi jeri, a powerful roundhouse kick aimed at her head. The kick sliced through the air with a vicious whistle. Again, Alara's response was confounding. Instead of leaning away or blocking, she did the opposite. She stepped in, collapsing the distance. His kick, meant to connect at its apex of power, instead wrapped harmlessly around her back as she entered the dead zone of the technique. And there she was again, inside his guard, a calm, centered presence in the heart of his storm. This time, he felt a light tap on his sternum, a place marker for a strike she chose not to deliver. A cold knot of unease began to form in Kenjiro's stomach. This was not luck. This was not passivity. This was a level of timing and spatial awareness that was almost supernatural. He was a master of distance, yet she was dictating it. He was the aggressor, yet she was controlling the engagement. He could feel his own rhythm, his lifetime of practice cadence, being systematically dismantled. His internal monologue, usually a calm voice of strategic command, was now a rising chorus of disbelief. She wasn't there. I threw the kick, and she simply wasn't there. But how? Her feet barely moved. She's reading my intention before I even commit to the muscle group. He grit his teeth, pushing the doubt away. He was Kenjiro Tanaka. He would not be humiliated in his own dojo. He abandoned single techniques and flowed into a complex combination, a symphony of destruction he had perfected over decades. He pressed the attack, his frustration fueling a ferocious barrage. A lightning-fast jab-cross combination, followed by a low sweeping kick designed to buckle her knees. It was a classic, effective sequence. But he was fighting a ghost. She moved with an eerie, predictive grace, her body seeming to shift and blur at the edges. His jabs met empty air. His cross was deflected with an almost lazy-looking flick of her wrist that sent a jarring vibration up his arm. When he launched the sweep, she didn't jump or retreat, she simply lifted her lead leg a few inches, allowing his foot to pass harmlessly beneath it, and placed it back down without a whisper of sound. The cold knot in his stomach was now a block of ice. Sweat, born of exertion and dawning dread, beaded on his forehead. He was breathing heavily, the explosive power of his style demanding a high price in oxygen. Her breathing, in stark contrast, remained slow and deep, her face a mask of placid concentration. It was then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, that the truth began to dawn on him. This was not karate. The principles were alien. He saw it in the way she maintained constant control of the centerline, the imaginary vertical line that divided the body. He saw it in her hand positions, not the classic closed fist of karate, but half-open hands ready to block, trap, or strike with fingers, palms, or knuckles. He saw it in the way she never committed 100% of her weight to any single movement, always maintaining a perfect, mobile balance. This wasn't a sport. It wasn't a traditional art. This was something else. Something stripped of all ceremony, all flourish, all kata. It was the brutal, efficient calculus of survival. It was combatives. Military. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The slight, quiet woman in front of him wasn't a timid beginner. She was a professional. A warrior trained in the art of incapacitating a human body in the swiftest, most efficient way possible. He, a master of the dojo, was a sportsman. She, a ghost from an unknown world, was a soldier. Gathering every last ounce of his pride and power, he decided to end it. He feinted a punch to her face, and as she reacted, or rather, as he expected her to react, he dropped his level and drove forward with his ultimate technique, a powerful, driving takedown, channeling all his mass and momentum to slam her to the mat and finish it there. The students gasped, expecting to see her thrown across the room. The world seemed to slow down. As Kenjiro's shoulder drove toward her midsection, Elara did not resist the force. She melted with it. In a single, fluid motion, she dropped her own center of gravity, pivoted on her lead foot, and used his charging momentum to spin her body around him. His takedown attempt plunged into empty space. As he hurtled past, her hand shot out and cupped the back of his neck, while her other forearm pressed against his throat from the front. She didn't apply pressure. She didn't choke him. She simply held him there. He was frozen, his entire body locked in a position of absolute vulnerability. His attack had been turned into his own prison. Her hand, calm and steady, was inches from his windpipe. Her body was perfectly braced. With the slightest exertion of pressure, she could have ended the fight, and his consciousness, in seconds. The spar was over. A silence so profound it felt like a physical presence descended upon the Tanaka dojo. The rhythmic thud of hearts and the ragged gasps of breath were the only sounds. Kenjiro remained frozen for a long second, not by her grip, but by the sheer, system-shocking totality of his defeat. He had been completely and utterly dismantled, his every attack turned against him, his lifetime of expertise rendered null and void. He wasn't just beaten, he was understood. She had read him like a book and penned a new, humiliating final chapter. Slowly, with a grace that seemed almost impossible after such an exchange, Elara released her hold. She took one step back, creating a respectful distance, and then performed a perfect, formal bow. It was not the bow of a victor. It was the bow of a student to a teacher, a gesture of respect that was, in that moment, more humbling than any gloating could ever be. Kenjiro stood upright, his body trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the aftershocks of a shattered worldview. He looked at his hands, then at her. He saw her not as the slight, timid girl who had walked in, but as what she truly was, a master of a discipline he couldn't even begin to comprehend. His pride, once a mountain, had been leveled into a plain. The students lining the walls were statues of disbelief. Their jaws were slack, their eyes wide. They had just witnessed the impossible. Their invincible sensei, a man they considered a martial god, had been pushed to his absolute limit and beyond, neutralized by a woman who hadn't thrown a single aggressive strike. The entire hierarchy of their world had been inverted. As Elara turned to walk back toward the edge of the mat, her part in the demonstration complete, a venomous voice cut through the stunned silence. "That's some kind of trick," Marcus snarled, his face contorted in a mask of disbelief and rage. His ego, already bruised, could not process this reality. He saw her perceived victory not as a display of skill, but as a personal insult that had to be answered. "That's not real karate!" Before anyone could react, he lunged forward and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, intending to spin her around and confront her. It was a foolish, reckless act, born of pure, unadulterated humiliation. He had crossed the line, moving from verbal mockery to physical assault. The instant Marcus's fingers clamped down on her arm, the placid stillness in Elara vanished, replaced by a terrifying efficiency. It was like watching a high-tension spring, compressed for hours, suddenly release. There was no anger in her expression, only a cold, clinical focus. The entire sequence was over in less than 2 seconds. As his grip tightened, she didn't pull away. She moved with his force, stepping in closer. Her free hand came up and cupped his wrist, not to pull, but to anchor it. Simultaneously, she rotated her body, her elbow coming up and over his forearm, applying pressure to his wrist joint in a way it was not designed to bend. A sharp, controlled S-lock. Marcus grunted in pain, his grip instinctively loosening. But she was already moving on. Using the captured arm as a lever, she continued her rotation, flowing seamlessly into his space. His own momentum, combined with her redirection, spun him off balance. His feet, which had been planted for an aggressive confrontation, were now hopelessly tangled. With a final, decisive twist, she dropped her weight and guided him to the floor. It wasn't a throw. It was a controlled descent. Marcus landed hard on his knees, a cry of pain and shock escaping his lips. His arm was now pinned behind his back, his shoulder joint screaming in protest, every ounce of his strength rendered useless by the precise application of leverage and anatomical knowledge. Elara held him there for a moment, a silent, powerful tableau of consequence. Then, just as quickly, she released him, stepping back as he crumpled onto the mat, clutching his arm. She hadn't broken anything. She hadn't intended to. The goal was control, not destruction. A roar, filled with a righteous fury that shook the very walls, erupted from Kenjiro. "Marcus!" He strode forward, his face a mask of thunderous rage and shame. "You are a disgrace to this dojo. You lay hands on a fellow student in anger? You shame my teachings. Get out. Do not ever show your face here again. Humbled and hurting, Marcus scrambled to his feet and fled the dojo without a backward glance. The silence returned, heavier than before. Kenjiro, his anger spent, turned to face Elara. The fury was gone, replaced by a look of profound, soul-deep humility. He walked to her, stood before her, and did something his students had never seen him do. He bowed. Not the perfunctory bow of a teacher, but a deep, 90-degree bow from the waist, a bow of ultimate respect, a bow one gives only to a true master. His voice, when he spoke, was thick with emotion, stripped of all its former arrogance. Vance-san, he began, using the respectful honorific. I have no words to properly express my shame. My pride, my arrogance blinded me. I judged you. I disrespected you. And I was wrong. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and she saw in them not a defeated man, but a changed one. What you possess is not just skill. It is mastery. I have been a student of karate my entire life, and today, you have been my greatest teacher. I ask for your forgiveness. The entire dojo held its breath. They had just witnessed the fall of their king and his immediate, public act of contrition. All eyes were on Elara, waiting for her reaction. A lesser person might have savored the moment, accepted the apology with a cool superiority, or offered a condescending, I told you so. They expected a victor's justice. But Elara's victory was not about dominance, it was about truth. She looked at the humbled master before her, a man whose entire world had just been upended, and she saw not an antagonist, but a human being who had faced his own fallibility and chosen honor over ego. A gentle, almost imperceptible softness entered her eyes. She returned his bow with a simple, respectful nod of her head. Sensei, she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. There is nothing to forgive. Her words hung in the air, a balm on the raw, exposed nerves of the dojo. Kenjiro looked up, his expression one of surprise and profound gratitude. We all have our blind spots, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the other students, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. It is easy to see only what we expect to see. It takes a strong man, a true master, to admit when he is wrong in front of his students. You have shown them a more important lesson today than any punch or kick. Her grace was a final, disarming technique, one that neutralized the last vestiges of tension in the room. She was offering not just forgiveness, but validation. She was restoring his honor, not by diminishing her own skill, but by elevating his character. Kenjiro finally stood straight, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. A small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. He looked at her, truly seeing her at last, not her size, not her gender, but the depth of character and the immense, hidden strength within. I don't even know your full name, he admitted, the realization dawning on him. Elara, she replied simply. Elara Vance. Elara Sensei. He corrected himself, the new title feeling both strange and perfectly right on his tongue. He turned to the rest of the class, his voice ringing with a new kind of authority, one tempered by humility. Let this be a lesson for all of us. True strength is not always loud. True skill does not need to announce itself. From this day forward, this dojo will be a place where we judge others only by their character and their commitment, not by our own foolish assumptions. The atmosphere had been irrevocably transformed. The whispers of mockery had been replaced by a reverent silence. The arrogant smirks were gone, supplanted by expressions of awe and deep, newfound respect. The students looked at Elara Vance, the quiet woman from the back of the room, and they saw a giant. In the quiet dignity of her victory and the profound humility of her grace, Elara had not just won a spar, she had purified a dojo, revealing that the ultimate mastery lies not in the power to defeat others, but in the strength to uplift them.